Hi, everyone, welcome. And that trip is like the beacon at the end of the light, like the light at the end of the tunnel. And I just keep being like, it's just get through all of it. Welcome, everyone. Hi.
Hi
And
everyone, Culture, welcome.
yeah, I was just explaining, welcome, everyone, that I'm going to Ireland for the first time in May. So I'm thrilled. I'm so excited. Welcome.
Yeah.
Hi. We'll give everyone a chance to hop in before we introduce ourselves.
Hmm.
Because as I was just telling Jen, this is actually Jen and I's first time that we're meeting. Hi. Oh, thank you. I'm so excited for that trip. Um, we've chatted a bit over email, and I was so drawn to the work that you do, but we've actually never chatted before, which I think makes for an even more fun and dynamic Substack Live because I'm getting to know you at the same time that my readers are getting to know you, and your readers are getting to know me at the same time that you are. And I think that's going to be really fun. And we have a lot to talk about.
We do. Yeah, it's very auspicious. I feel that we're doing it at this time, literally at the entry to Samhain, and you're going to go through these dark months. And then, when you come to Ireland, it'll be Bealtaine, the light
Mhm.
half of the year. So it's really powerful, I feel. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to start by Jen is powerful. I can already feel it. I'm going to start just by introducing myself, and then we'll have you introduce yourself. My name is Nikki Sizemore. I am a food writer and recipe developer, but also an explorer, I think, of life and what it means to feel connected to ourselves and to the earth and to something deeper. So my work, I have a newsletter and podcast and a forthcoming book that's coming out in January called Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And that's where I kind of explore all of these things and how I use food and the tool of cooking as a way to explore who we are, why we're here, and to find more pleasure and I think grace in our lives. Yeah, so that's me. What about you, Jen?
Oh, beautiful, Nikki. And it's so interesting because I feel that, there's a similarity in, my what I would call the dawn, the creative destiny. It's this old Irish word, that speaks to our creative destiny or calling, and similar for you, it's about, yeah, exploring the meaning of life, but through mythology, folklore, dream work, and so forth, And by background, I'm an anthropologist and a Celtic mythologist, so that fusion of culture with mythology is just, yeah, that's my passion for
I
sure.
studied anthropology in college too. That was my major, which is just so interesting as
Yeah.
that I'm so drawn to how all of these things connect. And you have a Substack newsletter, and then what is your website and what else do you do?
Yeah, so my Substack is the Celtic Creatives, and it's the same as my website. And what I do is I, offer teaching, mentoring around really what I'm interested in is how we can make Celtic soul a living aesthetic. So how can we center the soul in the everyday experience of life? And, with clients, I'm really passionate about helping to support people to uncover or find pathways towards their dawn, right? So, this old Irish idea that each of us is born with a soul's calling, which is really embedded in creativity in the Irish tradition.
Ah,
And, when we live into it, it's a gift bestowed by the divine. And when we live into it, we are literally offering back to the divine as well. So, yeah.
I love this because it's so much of what I feel and what I talk about from the periphery, but from a different lens. So I want to hop into all of that, but I do need to get the potatoes going. So just to give all of you a little idea of what's going to happen today is Jen's going to be talking about the traditionals and rituals of Samhain, and which I can't wait to learn about because I know like scratch surface level. And I wanted to cook something to honor this moment. And when I reached out to Jen and asked her what some of the traditional dishes were, one of the first she said was Colcannon. And I had never made it. I had never eaten it and have since fallen head over heels in love with this dish. And you'll see I'm making a version that is just my version. I mean, I think it's the kind of dish, there are as many mashed potato recipes as there are humans. And I think this is kind of in the same vein there. There's so many different ways you can make this. I'm going to do it with some caramelized cabbage, some milk that's infused with garlic. But before we get all into all of that, I'm just going to get the potatoes going. So I prefer to use Yukon Gold potatoes in my mashed potatoes. They're richer. They're a medium starch potato. You don't actually need as much cream and butter because they have more flavor and they have more lusciousness. So all I've done is peel and cut Yukon Golds into, 1 to 2 inch pieces and pop them into cold water. And by the way, if it's like Thanksgiving time for here in the US, you can do this step ahead of time and just keep the pot in the fridge. Season that with water or season that with salt. I'm going to go bring these back to my stove so they can start cooking and show you one more thing before Jen starts. And that is just, I'm all about flavor. So my recipes, my philosophy around food it's about pleasure, but it's also about flavor, like ways that we can build flavor in an accessible and easy way. I did go to culinary school, but my passion for cooking is simplicity. Like, how do we bring flavor in ways where we're not spending hours and hours in the kitchen? So one way of doing that is I've got the milk for the potatoes and I've crushed some garlic cloves and put that in the milk with the bay leaf and I've just warmed that on the stove. And I'm just going to let this sit. And that way we're going to add the warm milk that's all garlicky and yummy into the mashed potatoes. Okay, so I'm going to start cutting up some cabbage because you can't have Colcannon without cabbage. But Jen, I want to learn more about Samhain. What is your experience with it? What are the history, the traditions, and then we can lead into how you honor this moment in your
Mm.
present day life.
Yeah, beautiful. It's just so gorgeous to be here while you're cooking and while you're bringing your Colcannon to life. It's really, yeah, it's amazing. I'm going to be using your recipe now tomorrow, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, just Samhain. So I'll start by saying that Samhain is actually the Irish word for the month of November. And so Mina Sauna means November in Irish. And what it is it's an ancient Gaelic festival of our ancestors that marks the end of the harvest season and our descent really into the dark months.
Mm.
And it's likely that our ancestors began their year at Samhain, right? So in this dark time with the onset of winter, which is quite interesting, because all of life begins in the dark. And, there's even this idea that perhaps our ancestors began their day at sunset, not sunrise in terms of how we live today, which,
Mm.
for you, Nikki, as well, I think around food is really interesting. Like, if you were to imagine that the beginning of your day, the onset is sunset, right? So it starts with nourishment, with sleep before moving out into the world,
Ah,
as you wake at sunrise. Yeah.
yeah, that definitely. I talk a lot about nourishment, and that totally flips the script about how sleep is part of that beginning cycle. I love that, and you're right because everything starts in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. And all of the major kind of Irish festivals, they always begin at nighttime in the dark, right? So Ia Samhain, so tomorrow's Samhain Eve, which what we know now as Halloween, right? It always begins at the dark. And, like there's so many traditions that are centered around this and how the season is marked. But one of the most potent kind of images around Samhain would be it as a fire festival, right? So the idea of the bonfires. And this is really, really ancient in Ireland. And there is kind of tales of a particular area in not too far from where I live called Clochta. So Clochta is this ancient druidess, and there's a hill called the Hill of Clochta or the Hill of Ward. And the idea is that the ancestors, so the Fili, the poet seers, and the druids would have lit this great Samhain bonfire in her honor at this time of year, and that all of the fires of Ireland had to be quenched until the Samhain fire was lit. And the embers from that fire were then used to light a fire at the Hill of Tara, which was kind of the royal citadel, the royal capital of, the High King and the sovereignty goddess. And then the other fires could, in the homesteads could come into blaze. So yeah, so fire is a really important symbol of Samhain. And actually on the Hill of Clochta, they have found evidence of like a burning on that site that date, at least from the 5th century or maybe the fourth
Wow.
century as well. Yeah.
Mhm. I love I love the significance of fire this time of year because even in just my own body and my own tradition, like we have a wood burning stove in my house and we just lit it for the first time this week. And even like having candles on the table, there's something so magical about bringing that fire to our homes and something that creates a sense of sacredness even if it's just dinner with the kids. Really quickly, I've got 2 tablespoons of butter. I chopped up medium head of green cabbage. So, like I mentioned, my version of Colcannon, probably not traditional, just the things I love in it. I'm going to caramelize this cabbage. I'm going to get it really crispy and caramelized and golden on the edges because then that cabbage is going to pick up a lot of sweetness, which I love. So add this in, toss this with salt and pepper, and we'll go from there. As far as the fire goes, are there things that you do in your home relating to fire now?
Yeah. So I actually only shared this earlier this week on Substack. So, if anyone's interested, there is a post on my Substack around a ritual of fire for Samhain. So, one of the traditions here is to leave a chair out for the ancestors at this time of year, right? Because Samhain is, as it marks a transition into, the new year, traditionally, um, it is a time when the veil between this world and the other world is incredibly, incredibly thin. And one of the deities that's deeply associated with this time is the Cailleach. So Cailleach means veiled one in Old Irish. It's also the modern Irish word for a witch. But the Cailleach is this great goddess, that rules over the land at this time. And actually, before our live, I pulled a couple of cards for us today from a deck called the Wisdom of the Cailleach. And
Mm,
I'll share them here. But the first one I got, let me see if I can do that, is the,
I
you
love
see that okay?
that.
It's beloved. I'm trying to figure out how to work the camera here and make that kind of visible. But anyway, right, so there's the kayak here in her veil, in her cloak, and she's hugging, a loved one. And it says beloved. And I thought this is so fitting because the ritual that I share, is this idea of leaving a chair out for the ancestors. So, what you would do on Samhain Eve, the heart of the home is really, really important here. Like for all of the reasons that you spoke to, Nikki, like in a traditional Irish home, even like in an Irish cottage, you would have had a kailiach or a hag's bed in the alcove beside the fire, right, for the elderly of the house so that they are kept warm. Or if, someone in the dark months, like the Shanachie, right, she's the traditional storyteller, the bearer of the lore, when they would come to the homestead, traveling from home to home, um, in this time of year, they would always have the coveted seat closest to the fire, right? Because
Mm.
it's an incredibly damp landscape here, so fire is so important. And so what people would do traditionally is on Samhain Eve, you would leave the fire burning and you wouldn't quench the fire before bedtime and you'd leave a chair out for the returning ancestors so that they may come back and they may warm themselves by the fire. Your beloved essentially can warm themselves by the fire. And so this is a ritual that I do. I've done many times. Last year I did it as part of a 3-night dream incubation I did for Saren because you can also feel into what you dream that night, because for it, in the Irish tradition, the dream world, the other world, right? So the world beyond the veil and death are all interlinked. So you can commune with your ancestors in your dream world, the ancestors that have passed on. So yeah, so that's one of the rituals that I would always practice. And I kind of give guidelines and suggestions around how to do that in that post as well.
I love that so much because, uh, I've talked about ritual somewhat in my newsletter and in my book, I talk about it too. But I was just having a conversation with Steve Sabaker, who's going to be on my podcast. He's another food writer. But this idea of bringing ritual into the household with kids, and he's a very practical person. And he was like a little bit maybe skeptical about the power of ritual. And then he said he had to like do these rituals as a way like where his kids wouldn't roll his eyes at him at the table. I'm saying this from an American perspective where we didn't grow up with these traditions that you speak of. And yet, when we start to adopt them in ways that, leaving the hearth burning or even bringing the idea or the topic of our ancestors into the conversation, how much more meaning, like, and how much more meaning it gives to any kind of evening, any kind of day, but then how much my kids like grasp onto it. And I think it creates something really special and meaningful in our lives. And for me, I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois. I didn't have the rituals around the Day of the Dead or Samhain. We had like the candy Halloween holiday, and I hated it. I actually it's taken me a long time to fall in love with Halloween because now I live in a small town and Halloween's a big deal and it's very sweet. But the as I've started to bring some of this idea of the darkness and the connection and the connection to the other side and to lean into that, that's where I feel like I found personally so much more interest and joy, even though it's like, to me, this time feels like so deep and so dark and yet like so joyful. It's like this really big stretch of emotion and feeling, and it holds it all, right? Like that's how this time for me feels. So I just kind of wanted to name that because I think a lot of people in America who didn't grow up with these traditions that you find in other cultures, we lack some of that like emotional connection that is offered or that we can cultivate for ourselves right now.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for naming that. I guess like one of the ways maybe to cultivate it is by connecting with the deities that are associated with
Mm.
this time. So with those archetypal energies, with their stories, with the folklore, And like the kayak again, the other card that I got around her was first snow. So you see her moving across the land here, with a blanket of snow. And the kayak really rules over the land until Imbolc comes, until spring comes, and you have Bridget, or Brige, as we'd say, the goddess Bridget, who, brings spring with her. So often the stories are a way to connect with that, inner scape that's just dormant, but so alive, like stories actually have a physiological impact on our bodies, like when we really empathize with a character in a story or a myth, it actually releases oxytocin into our system, into our bloodstream, the same, as when we birth a baby. So, it's really incredibly powerful to connect with these stories and, because they're alive within you anyway. And I really believe, like having spent years now working with people in the Irish diaspora, outside of Ireland, like where you are, that it's in the DNA. And epigenetics is showing us that anyway, but the stories are in the bones. And it's just about reawakening them through, rituals. And, some of the rituals are really, I mean, they're so fun and light and really dark at the same time. Like an example of that is, the Barine Brack, which is like this speckled loaf that you get this time of year. It's like fruit loaf, you'd have like currants and cherries and, flour, whiskey, tea in it. And w- baked into the Barry and Brack is like different kind of so different items, right? So like you might have a rag in it, which if you cut the Barry and Brack and you get that slice of it and there's a rag in it, it means that you're going to experience poverty for the year ahead. Or if you get the gold ring, you're going to, have love for the year ahead, or there's a gold coin for wealth for the year ahead. So when I was a child, I loved the Barry and Brack, and I always wanted the gold ring. I don't know whether it was out of any kind of romantic notions, but more so like the thought of getting that ring and then sleeping with it under my pillow and the possibility of dreaming of like, my partner or love or whatever. To me, that was just the wild magic. It was more the magic than really the romance. But yeah, there's the darker side, like, oh, you're going to have poverty for the year ahead, but then you might have wealth. So yeah, it's all, and that Irish culture is full of that tension of the opposites, right? We're full of contradiction and we're able to actually hold that. And I think that's really interesting, particularly in the polarized times that we're in, being able to hold that tension within us is really important.
That's exactly what I was speaking to. It's like the Halloween I grew up with, there is still this idea of like darkness and scary times. And there definitely some of that tension exists. But what it avoids, or what this isn't within, this is just a household I grew up in. Like what was avoided was this idea of death too, and how that became so fearful instead of something that can be celebrated and embraced. And I think that's like maybe the biggest example of holding that tension, where we can sit with the idea of death and not slip into fear, but have an understanding and a reverence that it's part of this process of life. And it sounds like traditions like Samhain, in such a light storytelling way for kids, start to introduce them to that beyond just like the ghouls and the ghosts and all the things that we have that I grew up with, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's just that seasonal wisdom, like if we go back again to the Cailleach is this goddess who is as old as time, right? So loads of Irish folk tales center around, well, how old is the Cailleach? Like, so one example is this friar goes to her house with his novice and he says to her, how old are you? And she says, well, I'm so old, I don't even know how old I am. And he's like, no, we need to know your age, right? That kind of logos, like, I need to know. And she's like, yeah, grand. Well, if you need to know, go up to my attic, go up to my loft there, because there's an oxbone up there for every year that I've been alive. So
Mm.
anyway, he goes up with his novice and they start counting the bones and counting the bones and counting the bones. And basically they die of old age or they come down like completely shriveled and they haven't even made the slightest dent in the bones. And what she's showing them is, that she is this primal feminine force. She is so ancient, that she's beyond knowing. And it's the wisdom of winter, because we live in a time where like our productivity culture, we want to be in an eternal summer, right? You're not allowed to literally turn the lights off. We're surrounded by, artificial light. Whereas for our ancestors, they didn't have any of that. Like when the dark months came, and so having the Kaya to kind of remind us of the wisdom that each season offers us. There's such an intelligence in it, and when we can actually feel into the seasons on a macro level and celebrate them like you're doing with, nourishment and food and all of that, when we are experiencing maybe an inner Samhain, right? An inner kind of dark night of the soul in the middle of July, we can activate that seasonal intelligence to know that, yeah, okay, I can call upon the kayak. I can, nourish myself in these ways. I can have a winter while in summer, knowing that spring will come, that this will pass through. So, yeah. Just think there's so much in it.
Oh, there's so much in there. And being able to embody that is power. That gives us such an essence of agency, right? Instead of being caught, I was just writing my newsletter. Um, Instead of getting caught in kind of all of the distraction and all of the overwhelm, because after this weekend, we head into November. And for here in the US, that's like sliding slippery fast into the holidays. And for me, it feels especially extra this year because then my book launches in early January and there's just a lot. And it's like, wait, I have the agency to ground myself and to find those moments of darkness and quiet. I don't have to get caught up in all of this. Really quick, I'm going to just show you all. So, caramelized cabbage, you can see how dark and luscious it is. It's honestly so good on its own. But I'm going to add a little bit more flavor to this Colcannon by adding some brown mustard seeds, just 2 tablespoons to the cabbage. You don't really It's not gonna make the dish taste mustardy, but it adds like a little bit of pop of flavor. And then about a half cup of scallions, chopped scallions. And so I'm gonna check potatoes in just a second. They're like boiling very rapidly back there. And drain those and then we'll come back. But anyway, back to that idea of embodiment. How are like is that something that you think of or that you have tools to teach your clients to how to embody some of these concepts so that we can feel more at home with them? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So even simple practices like what I was saying earlier about, starting your day at sunset. So what if you were to just say, okay, this week as we enter sound, maybe next Thursday or Friday or whatever, choose a day and say, okay, I'm going to begin my day at sunset, not sunrise, right? And it does take a minute to kind of wrap your head around it, right? But if you were to say that my day begins at sunset, like how would I love it to be, right? So, you can see this as well in the dance of maybe feminine and masculine energies, right? So I'm going to go into this kind of feminine void. And maybe, you want to have like something nourishing to eat before bed. Maybe you want to do some journaling, some, whatever movement, meditation, like whatever brings you into that space of deep, deep nourishment. And then set an intention to invite in a dream. If you don't dream, everybody does dream, but sometimes, we lose that relationship with the psyche, with the dreaming time. And once you set an intention to dream, it will absolutely come back. So you can set an intention to dream, or, maybe you want to read like a fairy tale or folk tale that, just feels like bone nourishment or brings you back to a certain time in your life. And then you go off into the dream time. And then when you wake up, feel into the energy of, okay, this is actually the second half of my day. It sounds really like, I mean, it's just so simple, but it has an energetic impact, right? So then when you're moving out into the world, you're like, okay, well, I've really nourished myself in this depth, depth first, direction second, right? So I've gone into the deep space and now I'm going to move out into the world. So, what do I want my day to look like from this place of nourishment? How can I carry this forward into my day? So that's just one really simple way. And I've done this so many times myself. And I live in a chaotic household. I've 2 rambunctious boys. You know what I mean? I don't live in a lovely remote, like I fantasize about living in the fairy tale house in the woods, I can tell you sometimes, but I don't. So, these are kind of rituals as well that can be incorporated into any kind of everyday life.
I love it. So much of my work and so much of my book is about intention and bringing intention into the kitchen because for me, that has been the biggest shift in turning cooking, this feeding myself, really, this thing that like we all have to do into an opportunity for self inquiry and self care, and not in a performative way, but in a way that really, really uplifts my life and my all of me, like physical, emotional, spiritual. And I love that idea of like the intention before bed. And then switching, we're so focused on our output, like you said, like on our productivity, on the outward life. And what if the first part of our day is actually when we dream, when we go inward, and it's the other dimension? And if we put a little bit more importance there, how does that lighten up all the stuff we think we need to do during the day? All of a sudden, that stuff, like, that's not the most important stuff, right? I just feel like I can feel that shift just talking about it.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of brings a real energy of discernment, which actually discernment is like in the Irish tradition is the most important of all of the masculine values. So, in ancient Ireland, a king could not, you know, rule over the land if they didn't practice discernment. So there was two things: if they weren't married to a goddess of sovereignty, and if they didn't practice discernment being able to really kind of, understand the heart of a matter and, use that kind of symbolic sword of truth. And that was essential to kind of, yeah, to embodying a healthy masculine energy. So, yeah, if you were to wake up and, having had that nourishment, then inviting the energy of discernment,
Mm.
you'll be and win and wicca, as we say here. You'd be on the pig's back, you'd be doing well for the day ahead.
Mm. What are some of the other, you mentioned that some, that in the Irish tradition, that's a masculine energy discernment. What are some of the feminine masculine um practices? I'm not sure if that's the right word. And how do you find balance between the two? And I just added 2 tablespoons of butter to the potatoes. Are super tender. You can see, you can a knife goes in really easily. 2 tablespoons of butter, and I'm going to add that milk mixture. I'm not going to add the garlic cloves, but if you like garlicky mashed potatoes, just add the garlic right in with. Okay, now back to masculine versus feminine. I'm so interested in that.
So the like many different, ancient traditions, within the Irish tradition, there's huge emphasis placed on masculine and feminine energy, often symbolized in the mythology through the archetypal image of the king, um, married to the sovereignty goddess. So, for example, in Tara, which Tara is a place, a really ancient place, a very magical place. You'll have to visit it when you come here in County Meath, and it was the kind of the royal citadel, essentially. All of the five ancient highways of Ireland led to Tara. Tara is the place of soul, and Tara in Irish is Temer, which means exalted place or place of eminence. And this is where, the marriage of the masculine and feminine would take place. So no king could rule Tara without a sovereignty goddess in partnership, right? So the masculine can't rule on his own. He has to have the feminine in partnership with him. And, so the feminine represents this energy of the other world, of the land, of nature. And then, the king represents the people and so forth. And so they would be married in a ritual that's called the Banish Rigi. So Banish Rigi, it's hard to translate, but it kind of means just wedding feast. And what would happen was if the goddess approved the king, right? And this may have been enacted through like a high priestess, or we actually don't know exactly how it was enacted, but we know that a wedding libation, so a drink of likely some kind of form of mead, which is the oldest
Mm.
form of alcohol, would have been offered in a grail cup to the king, who would drink it, and it would symbolize their union. And one of the kind of oldest sovereignty goddess we have is Maeve. Maeve in Irish, you might know some people called Maeve. It's a very common name here. But Maeve means she who intoxicates, right? This
Mhm.
intoxication that comes from that bond of their union. And she ruled over Tara, and it said in the annals that no, like that basically she had nine successive husbands, right? So the husbands are mortal, so they're like, having their life and passing on, but she's immortal. that she's there, for kind of nine successive husbands. And when they marry, so there is the story of her with a king called Cormac MacArt, who is like he is probably the most, yeah, the king that practiced discernment, what's called the Fear Flahaman in Irish, the most. And their marriage was so bountiful. He was such a just king that that the land just flourished. That it was like cows, like calves are born, and half the time there was so much salmon in the rivers that they were bulging, that like if you touched a leaf, there was honey oozing from it. So it's this idea that that divine marriage between the masculine and feminine, is what enables the tribe to thrive. And that's, we can look at that within ourselves if we so desire, those kind of that integration of those seeming opposites again is what can enable us to really thrive as well.
That's so beautiful.
Mm.
And yeah, it all comes down to being in balance. I think that's kind of what I feel. And then that being able to getting out of this idea of polarization and duality, and being able to hold all aspects within ourselves and honoring that. I mean, we are the microcosms of the world. I mean, I'm looking out my window now. I'll show you guys. It is like peak fall, but it's a blustery, rainy day. So many leaves came down last night, and I feel that. We at the start of this season, I talked about this, like how much I felt that shift and how uneasy it was. And then there's practices like this or this Colcannon, which I have to show you, that help us find our rooting and help us root down in the foods that support us at this time are the foods that are in season, the root vegetables. All those things support our root chakra, and that gives us that sense of fortification, that sense of trust rather than spiraling into fear. That's when the root chakra is in balance. We're living in trust. And to me, this dish is like the epitome of that. I don't know if I shared this with everybody, but we've had a lot of new people join. But when I first made this, I hadn't made Colcannon before. Jen and I were planning this Substack live, and I served it to my kids, my family, and my 15-year-old, who's like not a big vegetable person, was like, "Mom, what is in these mashed potatoes? Why is this so good?" And I was like chuckling because my answer was, "Babe, it's cabbage." Cabbage is why they're so good. But you can see you've got those little mustard seeds throughout there, the creamy, creamy mashed potatoes, and then you can finish this with a tablespoon of butter. And what I found with this dish is mashed potatoes have always just been a side dish. Like they've always been a vehicle to hold something else. And they are great at that. And I love that for mashed potatoes, but they're like the vehicle for the roast turkey or for the gravy or like this kind of thing on the side. And this dish is in and of itself, um, uh, it like stands alone. Like I could eat a bowl of this with a spoon and have so much pleasure and joy in this as a meal, as opposed to just, mashed potatoes. So this Colcannon, I've heard you guys all to just eat it, but also we've served it since then with just roasted sausages, with roasted salmon that I brushed with a little Dijon mustard and some dill on top. And then tonight I'm going to put it over a shepherd's pie. So I'll let you know how that goes. But you mentioned something about this dish in our email exchange about how it is used in divination. What does that mean?
Yeah, so similar to the Barry and Brack, because those two would be really associated with sour and thyme. You can put a ring, like it's so dangerous, but anyway, you could put a ring in the Colcannon. That's what people used to do. They put like these items in the Colcannon, and if you kind of got it in your mouth, then you were it was fortune for the year ahead. So, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of health hazards to that these days, but back in the day, and when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, like no one cared about any of that, so it was just all about the magic.
Any other foods that um, I really wish you guys were all here. They're like buttery and creamy, but then you get the texture from the cabbage and the caramelization from the cabbage, and they're just so good. Are there any other foods that I think part of the reason actually that I never really loved Halloween, even as a kid, when is because there's no like besides the consumer candy, there's no like food traditions around. And I clearly like food traditions. So are there any other foods that are often made during this season?
Maybe the main dish, but like because you're at the end of the harvest, a lot of the Samhain traditions would be centered as well around apples, right? So, like the idea of the snap apple, like where you'd have the apple hanging out of the ceiling on a rope, and you have to like try and get the bite out of it, or bobbing for apples, and that kind of thing. Or what I love to have around this time of year, and actually I was hosting a retreat maybe 2 weeks ago in Ireland with a dear friend of mine, Aoife, and we went to the Hill of Tara and we harvested, it's the end now of the hawthorn berries. And hawthorn is such an important heart medicine.
Oh,
And within the Irish tradition, like the word for hawthorn is scac gial, which means a bright thorn. But there's also an old Irish word called hua, and it's one of the letters of the alphabet is hawthorn in Old Irish.
hmm.
So, the alphabet itself represents the land, and the kind of energies of the land. So, yeah, so just harvesting the hawthorn berries from this very magical place and drinking hawthorn tea, I absolutely love that this time of year. And also, if I'm doing any dream incubation, around Samhain, I will, work with mugwort. I'll have my mugwort tea, and I really associate the mugwort with the kayak as well. So those nourishing teas as well, like
Yeah.
hawthorn, like mugwort would be, yeah, just really good soul medicine and nourishment at this time of year.
Mm. I want to ask all of you if anybody has any questions for either or both of us, please pop them into the comments. I would also love to hear if anybody else has traditions or ways that they honor this time of year. I can already sense that just from this conversation, the way that I approach um, October 31st and November 1st is going to shift forever in a really, really beautiful way. Um, is there a Halloween celebration in Ireland where you are, or is it just Samhain? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, Halloween, like, I mean, is huge here. And what I've kind of seen over the last number of years is that, for a while there, so when I was growing up, it was kind of more traditional. Now we still dressed up, but the dressing up was kind of darker, right? Because the original idea of dressing up for Halloween, for Iha Hauna, comes from the idea that the veil between the worlds is incredibly thin. And when I mean the other world, like the other world in the Irish tradition is the realm of, the mythics or the goddesses, the gods who later are the she, the fairies, but also the dead, right? It's really, really fluid. And again, the dreaming time. So, traditionally in Ireland, this time was when the spirits were very active. And, one of the spirits that you don't want to bump into here is called the puka. So a puka is like this kind of goblin monster, like that can appear with a horse's head, a back horse, or a goat, or all kind of, yeah, usually quite hideous. And the thing about a puka is that a puka is incredibly intelligent and incredibly mischievous. So you have to be really, really careful. A puka is a real trickster, and there's so many tales of pukas, either hindering or they sometimes help people as well. And so, in order to avoid being spirited away to the other world by the likes of a puka or by some other maybe malevolent fairy or something, people would try to disguise themselves to look like they imagined these otherworldly beings or like what they saw in these otherworldly beings. So you would dress really like hideous. There'd be no beautiful, I don't know, frozen outfits or whatever, you know. And when I was growing up, there was a little bit more of that. We could still, you know, I dressed up as Glitter Cindy. I remember one year, and I was thinking, looking back in that photo, I found it a while ago with my grandmother, and I was like, there is no way I would be spirited away to the other world wearing all of that plastic. Like they just wouldn't want to, you know, deal with this little, you know, 8-year-old Glitter Cindy or whatever. So, you know, what I've noticed over the last number of years is that it became quite American, like quite American, you know, with like more of the gory and more of like the pumpkins, you know, because traditionally it was turnips that you carved here, not pumpkins. You know, because we didn't have pumpkins here, and that was, you know, when many Irish, you know, moved to that side of the world, they kind of replaced the turnip with the pumpkin and kind of more commercial. But over the last number of years, then it seems to be changing again. It's being called Samhain again a lot more. You know, Ireland is kind of maybe really celebrating its identity as the birthplace of Samhain, of Halloween in this way. There's a lot of reclamation happening here at the moment in general, kind of, you know, lots of conversations around decolonization and around the Irish language and so forth. So I am starting to see a bit more of a shift here, you know, but it's still, I mean, it'd be very similar to where you are in the world at the moment. But there's just, I guess, there's just a natural rootedness here, you know, in the
Yeah.
tradition. We know where it comes from. And that's what maybe makes it easier to embody, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel so nourished by talking to you, regardless of the food in front of me. I do feel uh, just well fed. And so I really want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your work and for all that you do.
Oh, thanks a million, Nikki. And yeah, just week is so cree, like a heartfelt gratitude to you as well, because I'm so excited now to try your Colcannon. And I love the way, as I said at the start, we're just doing it in different ways, you know, and food is so important. Like I would not have the skills that you have by any means. So it's really inspiring. And like what you were saying about like the root vegetables at this time of year and, you know, being able to see the foods that like our ancestors would have obviously only worked with foods that were in season. And that's why it's really, you know, cathartic and rooting to have Colcannon at this time of year. So yeah, just thank you for bringing this to life for us. You know, in this beautiful new recipe as well. So yeah, just thank you so much.
It is my pleasure. I'm actually, the recipe is going to be in my Sunday newsletter. So you will get there, but I will send it if anybody wants to make it for, like Jen, I'll send it to you for Samhain, which is sooner than Sunday. Then just shoot me a DM and I'm happy to share the recipe with you. But I'll be sharing the replay of this video in my Sunday newsletter with that recipe. So
Beautiful.
thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm
And
so looking forward to trying it out.
thank all of you for joining as well. We so appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Slán for now. Bye for now.
Bye.